Welcome back to our channel. The origins of the Lincoln penny go all the way back to 1909, marking a monumental shift in American coinage. For the first time in U.S. history, a real person, an American president, was to grace a circulating coin. Until then, coins had traditionally featured allegorical figures like Lady Liberty, abstract symbols of freedom and democracy. But the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth demanded something more. Something human. Something enduring. President Theodore Roosevelt himself had set the wheels in motion. He believed American coinage should reflect the nation's greatness, and Lincoln, the great emancipator, embodied that spirit. The man chosen to design this historic coin was a sculptor of immense talent and fierce determination. Victor David Brenner. Brenner's design was striking in its simplicity. A right-facing profile of Lincoln, sharp and detailed, his gaze steady and contemplative. It wasn't just a face, it was a presence. On the reverse, the original design featured two wheat stalks curving along the sides, framing the words, 1 cent, and United States of America. The wheat ears, reverse, would stay in place for 50 years. A hallmark of the Lincoln cent. By 1959, the wheat had given way to something else, the Lincoln Memorial. On the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth, the Mint introduced a new reverse design, one that honored the solemn marble temple built in his name in Washington, D.C. It was detailed, precise, and held a hidden touch of genius. Nestled between the columns of the memorial, if one looked closely enough, was a tiny seated figure, Lincoln himself, just as he appeared in the real-life monument. It was the first time a U.S. coin featured the same person on both sides. This design, Brenner's enduring portrait on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, was exactly what adorned the 1974 penny. It was familiar, trusted, and universally recognized. Millions of Americans carried these coins in their pockets without a second thought, never imagining that some among them might one day be worth thousands, even hundreds of thousands, of dollars. In 1974, 3 major U.S. mints were in operation: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco. Each one had its own rhythm, its own crew of skilled engravers, machinists, and inspectors. The dies used to strike pennies were carefully prepared. They were created by pressing a hub, engraved with a design, into a blank die multiple times. This process, while highly controlled, was not immune to imperfections. One such imperfection was the doubled die. If the hub and die became slightly misaligned between impressions, it could result in doubling of the design. On some coins, this is most noticeable in the date, in the lettering of "In God We Trust" or "Liberty." And when this doubling was especially dramatic and clear to the naked eye, collectors took notice. But doubled dies weren't the only anomalies that sparked collector interest. There were off-center strikes, coins where the blank, or planchet, wasn't properly aligned with the dies. There were clipped planchets, where part of the coin was missing due to a miscut during blanking. And then there were the holy grails, coins struck on the wrong metal planchet altogether. In the shadow of the aluminum penny experiments, rumors circulated of 1974 pennies being struck not just in copper, but in bronze, or zinc-coated steel, or even transitional errors where the metal composition changed midstream. Each one of these minting quirks became the seed of legend. But what separates a common penny from a priceless one? It's a combination of rarity, condition, and intrigue. A coin might be incredibly rare, but if it's worn, scratched, or corroded, its value plummets. Conversely, a coin in pristine condition, especially one certified by a professional grading service as being in mint state, can command astounding prices. Collectors look for luster, the shiny, reflective sheen that coins possess fresh from the mint. They look for strike quality, detail clarity, and the absence of bag marks or handling wear. In 1974, most pennies that entered circulation were spent without a second glance. But a small percentage were set aside, intentionally or by chance, and preserved. Some remained sealed in original mint sets. Others were placed into coin albums by young hobbyists, passed down through generations. Over time, the number of surviving high-grade examples dwindled. The rest suffered the usual fate, scratched, tarnished, and forgotten in change jars. Then came the collectors, the historians, the treasure hunters. With magnifying glasses and digital scales, they pored over coins from the 1970s, searching for anything that stood out. The thrill wasn't just in the coin, it was in the story it told. Imagine holding a coin that slipped through the cracks of official policy that should never have existed, or that captured a moment of transition in its very metal. A coin that, through some twist of fate, was not just a penny, but a time capsule. Even within normal copper 1974 pennies, tiny differences carried weight. A repunched mint mark, where the letter D for Denver or S for San Francisco had been punched twice by hand in slightly different positions. A strong strike where the detail on Lincoln's hair or the steps of the memorial was crisp and full. These were not flaws, they were signatures. Signposts of rarity. Every time a 1974 penny showed a quirk, collectors paid attention. Over the years, a few of these coins rose to the top, gleaming examples of perfection or mystery. In the right hands, with the right story, they became centerpieces of collections, trophies of numismatic passion, and among them, one coin stood out. Its surface glowed with a soft copper red, untouched by the oils of 1,000 fingers. The strike was razor sharp, every line of Lincoln's coat, every word, every star, etched with microscopic precision. And there was something else. Something that made seasoned collectors' hearts beat faster. A tiny anomaly. A diagnostic clue. Perhaps it was a double die, or a planchet composition no longer used. Perhaps it was struck in a rare transitional metal, or retained the shimmer of being one of the first coins off a freshly prepared die. Whatever the reason, experts knew one thing: this wasn't just a coin. It was a relic of a crossroads in American minting. A whisper of what could have been, and what almost was. As this coin changed hands, its legend grew. It passed from one private collection to another, studied, admired, and always protected. Each owner knew they were not just holding money, they were holding a fragment of history. And in time, it came to be valued not in cents, but in thousands. Collectors whispered about it at coin shows. Dealers fielded offers. And eventually, a figure emerged. A figure so large, it defied the humble origins of the coin itself. This penny, minted in 1974, in an era of economic uncertainty and numismatic experimentation, had become a hidden treasure. A symbol of rarity, of perseverance, of hidden value in the everyday. Its journey had spanned decades, continents, and collectors' vaults. It was no longer just metal. It was a story, an artifact, a marvel. And today, that story concludes in a breathtaking way. Because this single 1974 USA 1-cent penny, born in the shadow of an aluminum experiment, preserved through chance and cherished through time, holds a staggering value. A value that has reached an astonishing $106,000. The year was 1992. The Cold War had officially ended, the Soviet Union was a memory, and America stood alone as the world's dominant superpower. Bill Clinton was elected president, Ross Perot had stirred up politics, and technology was slowly infiltrating every aspect of daily life. Amidst the rush of change, the economy was beginning to rebound from recession, and pennies, those small coppery coins everyone carried in their pockets, remained as commonplace and overlooked as ever. But even in this modern age, one specific penny, struck that very year, would end up breaking all the rules. To the casual eye, a 1992 1-cent coin looked no different than any other. It bore the familiar face of Abraham Lincoln, staring forward with somber resolve, just as he had for decades. On the reverse, the Lincoln Memorial stood dignified and silent, a reminder of the man's legacy, etched into metal. But hidden within the mint's production lines, within the vast volumes of copper-plated zinc planchets churning out billions of coins, a quiet anomaly emerged, one that would go unnoticed for years. It all began with a design transition. A subtle tweak, almost imperceptible unless one knew where to look. From 1982 onward, the composition of the penny had shifted from solid copper to a copper-plated zinc. This change was driven by cost, as copper had become too expensive to justify for such a low-denomination coin. By the 1990s, the U.S. Mint was well into its copper-plated zinc era. But design-wise, another change was on the horizon. The lettering on the reverse side of the penny, above the Lincoln Memorial, had undergone a revision. On older designs, the letters in United States of America were spaced apart, the so-called wide AM. But in later designs, starting in 1993, the letters were brought closer together, the close AM. It was a barely noticeable shift, unless you knew what to look for. But here's where it gets fascinating. In 1992, as the Mint prepared to transition to the new style for 1993, a few 1992 pennies, an extremely small number, were accidentally struck using the 1993 reverse die. That meant some 1992 pennies had a close AM reverse, even though they weren't supposed to. And with billions of 1992 pennies produced, only a handful bore this anomaly. Most passed through hands unnoticed. They were spent, dropped, lost, collected in coin jars, and eventually turned back in for newer currency. But a few survived. A few were pulled aside by sharp-eyed collectors who knew what they had discovered. The implications were enormous. In numismatics, rarity is everything. Combine rarity with condition, and the value rises astronomically. Add in a genuine mint error, especially one rooted in a transitional die mix-up, and now you've got something that stops collectors in their tracks. Imagine being the person who first noticed it. A 1992 penny, seemingly ordinary, but with a peculiar closeness in the AM of America. It's not something a casual glance would ever catch. But under magnification, there it was, indisputable evidence that this coin was different. Unintentionally struck with a reverse mint for the following year. How such an error happened remains the subject of quiet debate among mint historians and die specialists. Perhaps a 1993 reverse die had been delivered early to the production floor. Perhaps it was tested, approved, and mistakenly inserted into the wrong batch. However it happened, the result was that a minute quantity of 1992 pennies now existed with a design combination that shouldn't have been possible. They were minted in both Philadelphia and Denver, but the close AM variety is staggeringly rare for either. Over the years, only a few examples have surfaced. Some emerged from rolls discovered by hobbyists, who searched through thousands of coins looking for treasure. Others were found in change, pure luck mixed with a keen eye. For most Americans, the 1992 penny was just another coin, an afterthought. But for collectors, that tiny gap, or rather the lack of it, between the A and the M became a symbol of hope. Hope that in a pocketful of change might lie a fortune. That the smallest, most mundane object might conceal a secret. And while most 1992 pennies remain what they always were, mass-produced instruments of commerce, a few carry with them a whisper of magic. Not magic of the supernatural kind, but of the historical kind. Accidents of timing. The right die, the wrong year. A mix-up unnoticed in the moment, but monumental in hindsight. One such coin, preserved in near pristine condition, untouched by wear or the oils of daily handling, gleamed with potential. When collectors got their hands on it, they didn't see a penny. They saw a rarity. A story. A piece of minting history that had nearly slipped through the cracks of time. And that story, etched in metal, carried through decades, now ends with a figure that defies belief. A 1992 USA 1-cent penny, bearing that rare, close AM, reverse and preserved in exceptional condition, is valued at a jaw-dropping $96,000. The year was 1995. The internet was beginning to weave itself into daily life, and the sound of dial-up filled homes across the country. People still wrote checks, VHS tapes lined shelves in living rooms, and Bill Clinton sat in the White House as the nation looked ahead to the future. The economy was booming, optimism was high, and yet, in the clatter of daily commerce, something remarkably ordinary slipped silently through fingers and registers. A simple copper-plated coin. Just a penny. But this one was different. It was minted in the billions, a routine part of everyday transactions. No one gave it a second glance. With Abraham Lincoln's solemn profile on the obverse and the familiar Lincoln Memorial on the reverse, it appeared identical to countless others. But deep in the churning machinery of the U.S. Mint, an accident was taking shape, an accident so subtle that most people would never see it unless they were truly looking. The story of the 1995 penny is, at its core, a tale of precision gone slightly awry. In the world of coinage, dies are everything. These metal stamps carry the design that gets pressed into blank planchets at immense force and speed. And in 1995, something unexpected happened. One of those dies, a key obverse die, shifted ever so slightly out of alignment. Just enough to cause doubling on the date and inscription. Not across the entire face, but in very specific places. It was slight, but unmistakable once noticed. It created what numismatists now call the 1995 double die obverse. Most Americans never noticed. They went about their business, spending and saving, dropping pennies in tip jars and fountains, passing them along without a thought. But for collectors, the year 1995 suddenly became exciting. Word began to spread. There was a penny out there, millions of them, perhaps, that bore a rare doubling effect. Not from damage or age, but from a mistake during production. A true mint error, one that would one day be worth far more than a single cent, but the magic was in the details. The doubling could be seen most clearly in the words, "Liberty," and "In God We Trust." Look closely, and the letters appear slightly shadowed, almost echoing themselves. It wasn't the kind of doubling caused by machine chatter or post-mint damage. This was true hub doubling, the result of a misalignment during die creation. That's the kind of error that catches the attention of serious collectors. At first, only a few sharp-eyed individuals found them. They pulled the coins from rolls, stared in disbelief at the doubling, and rushed to confirm their discoveries. Slowly, coin publications began reporting on the error, and a quiet frenzy began. People across the country started looking through jars, checking pocket change, and examining every 1995 penny they could get their hands on. It was a treasure hunt, hiding in plain sight. As more examples surfaced, it became clear that the mint error had occurred at the Philadelphia Mint. No Denver minted versions were known to exist. And even though many were found in circulation, finding one in pristine, uncirculated condition became the real challenge. A coin with that type of doubling, still gleaming with its original luster, untouched by the wear and tear of time, that was the holy grail. Time passed. The buzz around the 1995 double die obverse faded into the background of more dramatic coin discoveries. But the market didn't forget. Over the years, as the best examples were graded and slabbed by professional services, their values quietly rose. And in the world of rare coins, condition is king. A common 1995 penny might be worth a cent. But one struck with a double die error and preserved in near-perfect condition, that coin began to whisper its own legend. Collectors began seeking out the top-graded specimens. Coins that bore the doubled feature sharply, cleanly, and with no signs of wear. These were not easy to find. The mint had not announced the error at the time, so the majority were tossed into circulation and lost to everyday use. Fewer and fewer turned up each year in acceptable condition. But one day, a penny struck with a now famous error surfaced in virtually flawless condition. It had been preserved from the moment it was discovered. No fingerprints, no scratches, no hint of dulling or corrosion. And it carried the doubling as clearly as if it had been minted yesterday. And that 1-cent coin, born from a barely perceptible mistake, now carries a value that defies its face. Because sometimes, the tiniest errors yield the greatest treasures. Sometimes, it's the coins everyone ignored that end up being the most valuable, The 1995 USA 1-cent penny, with its famous double die obverse and in uncirculated, nearly perfect condition, has achieved a valuation that turns heads, stirs conversations, and inspires collectors around the world. Its value? A staggering $90,000. In 2006, America found itself on the threshold of a changing era. Social media was still in its infancy, with Facebook barely escaping college campuses, and YouTube only beginning to echo with viral laughter. Flip phones clicked open on every street corner, and the world was catching its breath before diving headlong into the smartphone revolution. But even in the most connected parts of the country, there were some things that remained untouched by time, quiet constants that had endured for decades. Among them, the penny. For generations, the 1-cent coin had passed silently from palm to palm, resting in jean pockets, gas station trays, and beneath car seats. Its presence was subtle, often forgotten, sometimes even discarded. But the 2006 penny, minted in the tens of billions, would carry a secret. A silent glitch in the production process would turn this common coin into an unexpected treasure. On the surface, it was nothing new. The coin's obverse featured the enduring profile of Abraham Lincoln, the same portrait sculpted by Victor David Brenner nearly a century earlier. His eyes, solemn and deep-set, stared outward beneath the word Liberty, blank by the year of issue, 2006. The reverse showed the Lincoln Memorial, columns proud and symmetrical, with a faint impression of a seated Lincoln inside. If one looked close enough to the untrained eye, there was nothing to suggest that this coin was different. It looked like every other penny minted that year, copper-plated zinc, 19.05 millimeters in diameter, and weighing just 2.5 grams. But hidden within the countless coins produced at the Philadelphia and Denver mints that year, a few slipped through with details that broke the mold. The error was so subtle that entire rolls were opened, scanned, and passed over before someone noticed. At first, it was disbelief. Could a modern coin, produced with such precision and advanced equipment, carry such a mistake? But there it was, doubling on the obverse. At the tips of the letters. Around Lincoln's eye. In the curl of his hair. This wasn't postman damage. It wasn't wear or smearing. It was die doubling, genuine, unintentional, and incredibly rare. Most collectors thought such errors were a thing of the past. The infamous 1955 double die penny, the legendary 1972 variant, even the famous 1995 issue, they all occurred in a time when dies were still manually aligned and subject to human miscalculation. But in 2006, the machinery had evolved. The process had been refined. Errors like this weren't supposed to happen anymore, and that's exactly why it mattered. Because in a sea of uniformity, this one mistake stood out. It wasn't just a doubled image. It was a story of imperfection in an era of cold, digital precision. A reminder that even the most modern systems, running flawlessly at full speed, could still produce something uniquely flawed and therefore uniquely valuable. When collectors began examining these rare 2006 specimens under magnification, they realized just how crisp the doubling was. It wasn't a blur. It wasn't ghosting or damage from circulation. The doubling was sharp, especially in the letters of "In God We Trust" and "Liberty." The contours had split ever so slightly, creating a mirrored echo that danced under light. The chatter among numismatists began to grow. Had this happened at both mints? How many were out there? Were these early strikes from a misaligned hub, or had a defective die been used for a brief run before being caught? Theories bloomed like vines, some speculating a one-off accident, others believing a short run had made it into circulation before being quietly stopped. Either way, the results were extraordinary, because unlike most pennies minted in 2006, those that ended up scratched, bent, or dulled by time, these rare double die examples, if caught early and preserved carefully, held extraordinary potential. A few were lucky enough to be discovered before being circulated. They still carried their original red luster, shimmering with that freshly minted sheen. No scuffs, no dings. Just perfect copper brilliance, wrapping around a mistake that never should have happened. And it was these few, so few they could be counted on one hand, that would go on to astound even the most seasoned experts. Coin grading professionals examined them with awe. Enthusiasts scoured bank rolls and dealer stock, hoping to find just one more. But as time passed, it became clear this wasn't just a rare penny. This was one of the rarest modern errors ever struck into a one-cent piece, because rarity, combined with clarity and topped with condition, is what transforms a humble penny into something remarkable. A copper-plated coin worth far more than its weight, more than its purpose, more than even its history. It becomes a legend, and for one such 2006 USA 1-cent penny, doubled, untouched, and glimmering with mint state brilliance, that legend now carries a value no one could have imagined. $96,000.